The day my son wheeled me into a nursing home, he whispered to my daughter, "By next month, the house will be ours." They thought I couldn't hear them. They thought age had stolen my memory and my instincts. They were wrong. I said nothing as they kissed my forehead and walked away, because I wasn't the helpless old woman they believed I was. And the biggest secret in that building wasn't hidden in a file cabinet or a bank account. It was hidden in me. By the time my children discovered the truth, they weren't fighting over my inheritance anymore. They were begging for my forgiveness. The first time my daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you'll be happier there," I knew she was lying. She couldn't hold my gaze for more than 2 seconds. Instead, she busied herself smoothing the blanket over my knees while my son stood behind her with his arms folded, staring out the windshield as if the parking lot deserved more attention than his own mother. The brick building in front of us looked pleasant enough. Flower boxes hung beneath the windows and a cheerful wooden sign welcomed visitors. A pair of elderly women sat on the front porch, sipping iced tea while a nurse laughed with them. To anyone driving by, it probably looked like the perfect place to spend the final chapter of a peaceful life. But children don't suddenly decide to move their healthy, independent mother into a nursing home because they're worried about her comfort. They do it because they're worried about something else. "I can still live on my own," I said quietly. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "We've talked about this." "No," I answered. "You've talked. I've listened." A silence settled inside the SUV. David finally sighed. "Mom, you're 74. I know exactly how old I am. You fell. I tripped over a garden hose. You were alone." I stood back up. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the same way his father used to, whenever he was losing an argument. "It's just safer." There was that word again, safer. People use that word when they want to take something from you without admitting it. My independence, my dignity, my choices. What neither of them knew was that I had spent my entire life studying people who hid their true intentions behind polite smiles. 43 years as a commercial real estate investor teaches you that contracts don't lie, but people often do. And my own children had suddenly become very difficult to read. Or perhaps they thought they were. 3 months earlier, everything had seemed perfectly ordinary. I lived alone in the house my late husband and I had bought almost 50 years ago. It wasn't extravagant, but every room held memories that money could never replace. The pencil marks on the laundry room doorframe where we'd measured the children every birthday. The cracked stone birdbath Robert insisted on repairing himself every spring. The swing he'd built beneath the old maple tree after Emily cried because all the neighborhood children had one. I still drank my coffee on the back porch every morning, still tended my roses, still drove myself to church every Sunday, and still volunteered twice a week at the public library. Life wasn't exciting. It was peaceful, until my children suddenly decided it wasn't good enough. The change began so gradually that I almost missed it. Emily started calling every day instead of once a week. David began dropping by unannounced. At first I appreciated the attention. After losing Robert 6 years earlier, the house often felt quieter than I liked to admit. But then the questions started changing. Are you remembering to pay your bills? Do you still balance your checkbook? Have you thought about downsizing? Do you really need such a big house? None of those questions were about me. They were about my assets. I answered politely every time, pretending not to notice the direction the conversations kept drifting. One Sunday after church, Emily lingered in my kitchen while I washed dishes. "You know," she said casually, "houses in this neighborhood are selling for incredible prices. I'm aware. You could make a fortune. I already have one." She laughed awkwardly. "I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant." She quickly changed the subject, but something inside me shifted that afternoon. Children rarely become interested in real estate unless they're imagining life after someone else's ownership ends. I hated myself for even thinking it. No mother wants to suspect her own children of calculating her worth. 2 weeks later, David arrived carrying coffee and pastries. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's usually dangerous." He smiled. "I mean about the future. Whose? Yours. My future mostly involves gardening. What if you needed care someday? I'll hire it. That's expensive. So is raising children." His smile faded. "Mom, I'm teasing." But I wasn't. Not entirely. He pulled out a folder. "I found some wonderful retirement communities. I didn't even look inside. I didn't ask you to." "I know. So why are you shopping for my life?" He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Emily worries. Emily worries or Emily plans." His face revealed something before his mouth could hide it. A flicker, tiny, but unmistakable fear, not concern. Fear that I'd seen through something. That evening, I climbed the attic stairs carrying a flashlight. Robert used to joke that I trusted paperwork more than people. He wasn't wrong. Inside an old steel filing cabinet sat every deed, contract, partnership agreement, insurance policy, tax return, investment record, and corporate document from nearly 5 decades. Some women collected jewelry. I collected evidence. I unlocked the bottom drawer and removed a plain manila folder. Inside rested the original ownership documents for Willow Creek Residence, a beautiful senior living community built 12 years earlier by a development partnership. Officially, the operating company managed everything. Unofficially, I owned the property, every inch of it. The arrangement had been intentional from the beginning. My investment group preferred privacy. The management company leased the facility under a long-term agreement, while ownership remained with a quiet holding company that very few people ever bothered investigating. Even most employees didn't know who ultimately owned the land beneath their feet. There had never been a reason for anyone to know until now. I smiled to myself before locking everything away again. Not because I expected it to matter, because I suddenly suspected one day it might. The following month, Emily insisted I visit a neurologist. "You've been forgetting things." I forgot where I put my reading glasses. They were in the refrigerator. I was carrying groceries. David nodded in agreement. "That's not normal." It happened once. Emily exchanged another glance with her brother. There it was again. That silent conversation people think no one notices. I agreed to the appointment, mostly because I wanted to see how far they intended to take this performance. The neurologist spent nearly an hour testing memory, reasoning, coordination, balance, and cognitive function. When he finished, he smiled warmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, your results are excellent." Emily blinked. "So, everything is normal? Better than many patients 20 years younger." David shifted in his chair, but she fell. People fall at every age. He closed the file. "I see no medical reason she cannot continue living independently." Relief washed over me, not because I had doubted myself, because now there was a witness. A professional, someone my children couldn't easily dismiss, or so I believed. 3 weeks later they returned, this time with brochures, an attorney and urgency that seemed strangely out of proportion. "Mom," Emily began gently, "we've found somewhere wonderful." I stared at the photographs. Willow Creek Residence. My own building. Neither of them had the faintest idea. They spoke enthusiastically about the gardens, the staff, the activities, the private dining room, the medical support, the safety features. Every compliment they offered described something I'd personally approved during construction years earlier. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Who's paying for this?" David smiled. "We'll sell the house." "My house?" "It makes financial sense. I didn't put it on the market. We can help." The room became very still. Then Emily quietly slid another document toward me, a power of attorney, already prepared, already waiting for my signature. That was the exact moment I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things and started wondering how much they had already planned without me. I didn't sign the document. Not that day. I folded my hands on the kitchen table and looked at both of them, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Emily forced a smile. "Mom? Did you hear me?" I heard every word. David leaned forward. "Then you understand why this is the best decision." "For whom?" Neither of them answered. Emily finally spoke. "For everyone." There it was again. Not for me. For everyone. I gently pushed the power of attorney back across the table. "I'll have my attorney review it." The color drained from David's face for only a second before he recovered. "That's not necessary." "It is if my signature is involved." "We're only trying to help." "I didn't say you weren't." "But you don't trust us?" I held my son's gaze. "I trust people who don't mind having paperwork reviewed." The room fell silent. Emily stood first, collecting the brochures with hands that shook just enough for me to notice. "Just think about it." "I will." They left 10 minutes later, but not before I caught David whispering something on the front porch. He didn't realize the kitchen window was open. "This is taking longer than we expected." Expected. Not hoped, expected. Those two words echoed in my mind long after their car disappeared around the corner. That evening, I called the only person I trusted completely. "Margaret speaking. It's Helen." "Helen? You never call after dinner. What's wrong?" Margaret Collins had been my attorney for 22 years. Before that, she'd been Robert's legal assistant. She knew every investment we'd ever made, every property we owned, and every decision we'd carefully documented. "I think my children are trying to rush me into signing something." She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of something?" "A power of attorney." Another pause. "Were they expecting you to sign immediately?" "Yes." "And when you refused?" They looked disappointed. Not concerned. Disappointed. "I want you to bring every document they've given you." "Tomorrow morning. I already planned to." "No," she said firmly. "Bring everything. Even the brochures." "The brochures?" I've learned over the years that people often reveal their intentions in the details they think no one will examine. The next morning, Margaret spread everything across the conference table in her office. She read every page twice, then a third time. Finally, she removed her glasses and looked at me. "Helen?" "What?" "This isn't a standard power of attorney." "It isn't?" She slowly turned one page toward me. "They've included language allowing your attorney, in fact, to liquidate real estate assets if it's considered in your best interest." "My house." "Your house." I felt my stomach tighten. "And that's not all." She pointed to another paragraph buried beneath several pages of legal wording. "If you were declared unable to manage your affairs even temporarily, they could control nearly every financial decision you make." I looked at the signature line again. It suddenly felt less like a legal document, more like a surrender. Margaret folded her hands. "I have a question." "Go ahead." "Did your children draft this?" "They said an attorney prepared it." "I'd very much like to know which attorney." "So would I." She smiled faintly. "Then let's find out." For the next week, I did something my children never imagined I would do. I stopped arguing. When Emily suggested touring Willow Creek residence again, I agreed. When David talked about simplifying my life, I nodded thoughtfully. When they spoke about safety, convenience, and peace of mind, I thanked them for caring. Their relief was almost immediate. They thought they had finally convinced me. Was what they didn't realize was that I had stopped resist because I had started watching. So, people reveal far more when they believe they've already won. And my children suddenly became very talkative. Emily stopped asking whether I wanted to move. Instead, she started discussing what color she thought the living room should be after everything was settled. David mentioned that a smaller place would be easier for me, then caught himself halfway through the sentence. "I mean, after you decide what you want." After I decide. Not if the assumption slipped out before he could stop it. I simply smiled and poured him another cup of coffee. You've certainly thought this through. He laughed nervously. We're just trying to plan ahead. Planning ahead has always been your strength. He took my agreement as encouragement. It wasn't. It was bait. The following Thursday, Emily called while I was trimming the rose bushes. Mom, I scheduled another tour at Willow Creek. You already scheduled it? I knew you'd probably say yes. You seem awfully confident. I just want you to see how wonderful everyone is. I'll be there. The moment I arrived, memories flooded back, every stone walkway, every flower bed, every tree lining the entrance. I remembered standing on that very sidewalk 12 years earlier with the architect, arguing that the gardens should look like a neighborhood park instead of a medical facility. Old age deserved beauty, not sterility. Emily thought I was admiring the landscaping. I told you it was beautiful. It certainly is. She had no idea I had personally approved every inch of it. The executive director greeted us warmly. Mrs. Whitmore, welcome to Willow Creek. Thank you. He spent nearly an hour showing us the dining room, activity center, chapel, library, and courtyard. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. Clean, warm, respectful. The staff treated every resident with genuine kindness. That was something I'd insisted upon when negotiating the original lease agreement years earlier. As we walked past the administrative offices, I noticed a familiar face, Thomas Reynolds. He had started as an assistant property manager during construction. Now he served as regional operations director. He glanced at me for only a second before politely looking away. Then his eyes snapped back. Recognition flashed across his face. He knew exactly who I was. I gave the smallest shake of my head, barely noticeable. His expression never changed. Mrs. Whitmore, he said professionally, extending his hand. Welcome, it's a pleasure. His handshake lingered just long enough for him to understand. Not here, not now. Play along. I hope you'll enjoy your visit, he said. I'm sure I will. Emily smiled. Everyone here is so friendly. Thomas nodded. We're very proud of this community. His voice remained perfectly professional, but I noticed something else. He never once referred to me as a prospective resident, only as Mrs. Whitmore, respectfully, carefully. As though he understood this visit wasn't what it appeared to be. After the tour, Emily couldn't stop smiling. So? It's lovely. I knew you'd love it. I can see why people feel comfortable here. She looked almost relieved. Does that mean you're ready? I pretended to think for a long moment, then I slowly nodded. I suppose maybe it's time. Emily threw her arms around me so quickly it almost startled me. Oh, Mom, you won't regret this. I hugged her back. I certainly hope not. But, as I looked over her shoulder, I caught Thomas standing across the lobby. Our eyes met for only a heartbeat. He gave the slightest nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was a promise. He understood that whatever game my children thought they were playing, they had no idea whose house they had just walked into. The moment Emily drove away, I didn't go home. Instead, I walked back through the front entrance alone. The receptionist smiled politely. Can I help you, Mrs. Whitmore? I'm here to see Thomas Reynolds. She picked up the phone. One moment, please. Less than 30 seconds later, Thomas appeared from the hallway. The professional smile he'd worn during the tour disappeared the instant we were out of sight of the lobby. Helen, he said quietly, I was wondering when you'd come back. You recognized me. I recognized you the second you walked through those doors. He led me into a private conference room and closed it behind us. I assume your children still don't know. They don't know a thing. He let out a slow breath. I've been managing this property for almost 10 years, and I've never had the chance to thank you personally. You've done an excellent job. We've tried to honor the vision you and Mr. Whitmore had. I smiled. My husband would have been proud. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas leaned forward. So, Why are you really here? I placed the glossy brochure on the table between us. My children want to move me into Willow Creek. His eyebrows rose. As a resident? Yes. And they have no idea? No. He sat back in his chair, almost speechless. Well, that's certainly unexpected. It gets worse. I explained everything, the sudden concern, the daily phone calls, the power of attorney, the pressure to sell my home, the attorney's warning. Thomas listened without interrupting once. When I finished, his expression had completely changed. This doesn't sound like concern. It isn't. It sounds planned. I believe it is. He remained silent for several seconds before speaking carefully. If you decide to move in here, I already have. His head tilted slightly. You have? I'm going to let them believe they've won. Helen, I need the truth. They'll be more careless if they think you're out of the way. Exactly. Thomas slowly nodded. I understand. But I need one promise. Anything. No one here can know who I am. You want your ownership kept confidential. I've kept it confidential for 12 years. He smiled. It'll stay that way. I'll be treated like every other resident I det, without exception. And if my children ask questions, they'll receive exactly the same information any family would. I looked him directly in the eyes. But if something unusual happens, I'll document everything, every conversation, every visitor, every request, every piece of paperwork. Thomas opened a notebook and wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. Mrs. Whitmore. Confidential. Then he looked up. I have a feeling this isn't about a nursing home anymore. No, it's about finding out how far your own children are willing to go. I stood to leave, but before I reached the door, Thomas spoke again. There's one more thing. I turned around. Yesterday, before your tour, your son called. My hand froze on the doorknob. What did he want? He asked several unusual questions. What kind of questions? He wanted to know how quickly a resident's house is usually sold after moving in, who normally handles their financial paperwork, and whether family members can attend meetings with residents when legal documents need to be signed. A chill ran through me. He asked all that? Thomas nodded slowly. I thought it was odd at the time. I felt my heartbeat quicken. David hadn't been planning my future. He'd been planning my finances. And somehow, I was beginning to fear that moving me into Willow Creek was never the final step. It was only the beginning. The moving truck arrived the following Tuesday. I packed only the things that truly mattered. A framed photograph of my late husband, a worn leather Bible, 3 novels I'd read more times than I could count, and a small wooden jewelry box that held far more memories than jewelry. Emily insisted on handling the rest. You don't need to worry about anything, Mom. I've learned that whenever someone says that, I replied with a faint smile, it's usually when I should worry the most. She laughed, assuming I was joking. I let her. As we drove toward Willow Creek, I watched familiar streets disappear behind us. Every mile felt like another chapter of my life folding closed. I wasn't grieving the house as much as I was grieving the trust that had once existed between my children and me. The staff welcomed me warmly. Thomas greeted me with the same professional courtesy he'd shown during the tour. Careful not to reveal that we had spoken privately days before, my room overlooked the central garden. Roses lined the walking path, and a stone fountain sent gentle ripples across a small pond. I'd approved that fountain years ago after insisting residents deserved something peaceful to wake up to each morning. Emily looked around with satisfaction. See? Isn't this wonderful? It's comfortable. I knew you'd love it. She hugged me tightly before leaving. We'll visit all the time. I smiled. I'll look forward to it. But after she walked out, I noticed something strange. Instead of heading toward the parking lot, she stopped at the administrative offices. A man in a gray suit was already waiting for her. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a nurse. He carried a leather briefcase stuffed with folders. From my window, I couldn't hear a single word they exchanged. But I did see Emily hand him a thick envelope. He opened it, glanced through several papers, and slowly nodded. Whatever was inside, it wasn't routine. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. When the man finally walked away, he slipped the envelope into his briefcase with the kind of care people reserve for documents that matter. Emily never looked back toward my room. She simply climbed into her car and drove away. Standing at the window, I whispered to myself, "Now we're finally getting to the truth." Because if my children believed moving me into Willow Creek was the end of their plan, then they were about to discover it was the moment I started watching every move they made. The first night at Willow Creek was almost unnervingly peaceful. The hallway outside my room grew quiet by 9 o'clock. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed at an old black-and-white movie playing in the common room. A nurse softly wished each resident good night as she made her rounds. If I hadn't known why I was really there, I might have believed my children had actually chosen a lovely place for me. But beautiful surroundings can hide ugly intentions. The following morning, I joined several residents for breakfast. An elegant woman with silver hair introduced herself as Charlotte. "First day?" she asked. "It shows," she smiled. "Only because you're still looking around instead of looking down." I laughed. "I suppose you're right. You'll learn everyone's stories eventually." "I hope so." She stirred her oatmeal thoughtfully. "We all came here for different reasons." I wondered how many of those reasons were voluntary. Later that afternoon, Thomas knocked gently on my door. "May I come in?" "Please." He closed the door behind him. "I've reviewed the visitor logs. So soon? I wanted to establish a baseline, and nothing unusual yet." He handed me a small notebook. "Keep this." I opened it. Every page was blank. "For what?" "Dates. Conversations. Anything your children ask you to sign. Anything they say that feels unusual. I've been documenting things my entire adult life. I had a feeling you would appreciate a written record." I smiled. "My husband used to say, memory fades, ink doesn't." Thomas nodded. "Exactly." After he left, I placed the notebook inside my bedside drawer. By the end of the week, it already contained 6 pages of observations. Emily visited every other day. David came only twice. That alone told me something. Emily handled emotions. David handled business. The second visit changed everything. Emily arrived carrying flowers, magazines, and a folder. I brought a few papers. "What kind of papers?" "Oh, nothing important." Whenever someone says that, the papers are always important. She sat beside me. "I've been thinking. Dangerous habit." She smiled politely. "I know this transition has been difficult. It has. So I thought maybe we could simplify a few things." She opened the folder. Bank statements, insurance forms, brought property tax notices. All carefully arranged. "I don't understand. I just thought we could organize everything. I've managed my finances for 50 years. "I know. So why start now?" She hesitated. "It'll be easier." "For whom?" "For everyone." That word again, everyone. Never me. She slid a form across the table. "It only lets me speak with the bank if there's ever an emergency." I read every line. It wasn't a power of attorney, but it was another step toward giving her access. Small steps. That's how careful people move, one signature at a time. "I'd like Margaret to review this." Emily's smile disappeared for just a fraction of a second. "You don't trust me?" "I trust legal advice." "It's such a simple form, then your patience should be simple too." She quietly gathered the papers. "We can do it another day." After she left, I immediately wrote down every detail in the notebook. Her exact words, the time she arrived, the documents she carried, even the color of the folder. Small details become important later. 2 days passed. Then something happened that neither of my children could have anticipated. A maintenance employee accidentally delivered a sealed envelope to my room instead of the administrative office. The address wasn't mine. It was marked, "Attention. Regional Operations Director, confidential." Asterisk, before I could even stand. Thomas knocked. I'm so sorry. That was delivered to the wrong room. I handed him the envelope. As he reached for it, something caught my eye. The sender's name. It belonged to the same law firm that had prepared the power of attorney my children wanted me to sign. Thomas noticed my expression. You recognize it? I do. His face grew serious. I'll find out why they're corresponding with Willow Creek. You can do that? As regional director, I can ask questions. And if they don't answer? He smiled faintly. They usually do. That evening, he returned after dinner. He closed the door. They responded faster than I expected. And the law firm requested copies of your residency agreement. My heartbeat quickened. They requested them? Yes. Who authorized that request? They claimed they represented your family. My family doesn't represent me. I know. Were the records released? Thomas shook his head. Not without your written consent. I slowly exhaled. So they tried. They did. A cold realization settled over me. David hadn't merely been planning ahead. Someone was already acting as though my affairs belonged to them. And whoever that attorney was, they believed it was only a matter of time before I stopped saying no. They were wrong. If anything, every new discovery strengthened my resolve. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a quiet routine. Every morning, I joined Charlotte and a handful of other residents for breakfast. We talked about books, grandchildren, old recipes, and the strange way time seemed to move both quickly and slowly once you reached a certain age. Those conversations reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. Growing older didn't make people invisible. Other people simply stopped looking. That was a mistake I intended to use to my advantage. People rarely noticed an elderly woman sitting quietly in the corner of a room. They assumed she wasn't paying attention. I paid attention to everything, every visit, every phone call, every expression that crossed my children's faces. Emily came often, always carrying homemade cookies or flowers. She played the role of the loving daughter perfectly. Nurses adored her. David visited less frequently, but when he did, his questions were never about my health. How are they handling your paperwork? Have you met with administration yet? Do they keep copies of your identification? Have they asked you about your financial accounts? Each question sounded harmless on its own. Together, they painted a different picture. One afternoon after David left, Thomas stopped by my room. You noticed it too, I did. He never asks how you're sleeping. No. He never asks if you've made friends. No. He only asks about documents. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I checked our records. And? He's called the front office 4 times this week. What did he want? He asked whether you had completed your intake paperwork. Anything else? He wanted to know who was authorized to receive updates about your affairs. My affairs? His exact words. I folded my hands in my lap. Did anyone give him information? Absolutely not. He hesitated. There's something else. I looked up. The attorney who contacted us last week called again. My pulse quickened. What did they say? They claimed there was an urgent need to review documents related to your residence. Urgent? Yes. Did they explain why? They wouldn't discuss it over the phone. I stood and walked toward the window overlooking the garden. The fountains sparkled in the afternoon sun. Residents laughed as they played cards beneath a shaded gazebo. Everything outside looked peaceful, but somewhere beyond those gardens, someone was becoming impatient. And impatient people make mistakes. The mistake came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, Emily arrived unexpectedly. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes, and she kept checking her phone as though she were waiting for bad news. Everything all right? I asked. She forced a smile. Just busy. Work? Something like that. She reached into her purse and pulled out another folder. I know you wanted Margaret to review everything before. I still do. This isn't the same. I opened the folder. Most of the pages were ordinary administrative forms. Then I reached the final page. My signature was already there, At least, it looked like my signature. For several long seconds, I simply stared at it. Emily must have mistaken my silence for uncertainty. See? It's just confirming what we already discussed. I slowly raised my eyes to meet hers. When did I sign this? The color drained from her face. What? This signature. She looked down. I you thought what? I must have brought the wrong copy. I held the paper closer. The signature wasn't terrible, but it wasn't mine. Someone had copied it. Not perfectly, just well enough that a casual glance might not notice the difference. My heartbeat remained steady. Years in business had taught me one invaluable lesson. Never reveal your strongest evidence the moment you find it. Instead, I quietly placed the document back inside the folder. I think you're right. She looked up in surprise. You do? You probably brought the wrong copy. Relief flooded across her face so quickly, it almost made me sad. She believed I'd missed it. She believed the forgery had worked. She hugged me before leaving. I'm so glad you're settling in here. Mom, so am I. After she walked out, I waited exactly 30 seconds before picking up the phone. Thomas? Yes? I think we've just found the first real crack in their plan. What happened? I have a document I'd like you, and my attorney, to examine. There was a pause. Is it serious? I looked again at the signature that wasn't mine. It just might change everything. Margaret arrived the next morning, carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase and the calm confidence that had steadied me through decades of business negotiations. Thomas escorted her to my room through a side entrance to avoid unnecessary attention. The moment the door closed, I handed her the folder. She adjusted her glasses and read every page without saying a word. Then she reached the final page, the one with the signature. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she pulled a small magnifying glass from her briefcase. Thomas looked at me. Is that normal? I smiled faintly. For Margaret? Perfectly. Nearly 5 minutes passed before she finally looked up. This isn't your signature. I know. It's a reasonably convincing imitation. But, she pointed to one small detail. You always cross your capital H from left to right. I leaned closer. She was right. I've signed thousands of documents over the years, I said quietly. I never realized I did that. You've done it on every legal document I've ever filed for you. Thomas folded his arms. So whoever copied it didn't know her habits. Margaret nodded. They copied the appearance, but not the muscle memory. Silence filled the room. Finally, Thomas asked the question we were all thinking. Can we prove it? Margaret smiled. Oh, yes. She opened her briefcase and removed 3 old contracts I'd signed years earlier. She placed them beside the questionable document. The spacing matches. The slant is similar. The pressure is close. She tapped the paper with one finger. But this, she pointed to the beginning of my last name, was traced from another signature. Thomas frowned. You're certain? I'd testify to it under oath. A strange mix of relief and heartbreak washed over me. Relief because I wasn't imagining things. Heartbreak because someone had actually tried. Not a stranger, not a business rival. Someone close enough to know what my signature looked like. Margaret carefully slipped the document into a clear evidence sleeve. We're keeping this. What now? I asked. Now we don't accuse anyone. Thomas looked surprised. We don't? No. Why not? Margaret closed her briefcase. Because the moment they realize we're suspicious, they'll become cautious. And if they think Helen never noticed, they'll continue. She looked directly at me. People rarely stop a dishonest plan halfway through. They usually become bolder. I slowly nodded. So we wait, we observe, we document. And when the time comes, Margaret said, we present everything at once. That afternoon, Emily called. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. I was just having tea. Everything okay? Perfectly. I've been thinking maybe we should finish that paperwork this weekend. I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. I've been thinking too. Oh? I've decided I don't want to keep delaying things. There was a brief silence, then I heard her exhale with obvious relief. Really? Yes. I knew you'd come around. I suppose you've been very patient. We only want what's best for you. I'm sure you do. After we hung up, Thomas looked at me curiously. You just told her. I told her exactly what she wanted to hear. You intend to sign something? No. I walked to the window and watched the gardeners trimming the rose bushes below. I intend to find out who else is involved. That evening, the receptionist called my room. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes? You have a visitor. I wasn't expecting anyone. It's your son. I glanced at the clock. David almost never visited on weekday evenings. Something had changed. When I entered the visitor's lounge, he was already seated at a small table. He wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was a sharply dressed man in his 50s, carrying the same style of leather briefcase I'd seen through my window the day Emily moved me in. David stood. Mom, thanks for coming down. I looked at the stranger. And you are? The man smiled professionally and extended his hand. My name is Richard Lawson. I shook it politely. I'm pleased to meet you. I'm an estate planning consultant. I turned slowly toward David. An estate planning consultant? He shifted uncomfortably. I thought it might help to have someone answer your questions. My questions? Richard opened his briefcase. I understand there are a few documents you've been hesitant to sign. I didn't sit down. Instead, I looked from the briefcase to my son and back again. Then I smiled, because for the first time since all of this began, they had made a mistake in front of a room full of witnesses. And they had no idea I'd been hoping they would. I took my seat slowly, making sure the receptionist at the front desk had a clear view of our table. 2 residents were playing chess by the fireplace, and a volunteer was arranging fresh flowers nearby. Good. If this conversation went where I suspected it would, there would be no shortage of witnesses. Richard Lawson slid a folder toward me with practiced confidence. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you've had some concerns. I have. My job is simply to answer questions. I appreciate that. He smiled, clearly expecting cooperation. I opened the folder. The first few pages were harmless enough. General information about estate planning, healthcare directives, and financial management. Then I reached the last section. There it was again, another authorization, different wording, same destination control. I looked up. Who hired you? Richard answered without hesitation. Your children asked me to review your situation. My situation? They're concerned about protecting your assets. My assets seem to have become very popular lately. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, that's not fair. No? Emily finally arrived, slightly out of breath. I'm sorry I'm late. She looked from me to Richard. Have you started? We're just talking, I answered. She smiled with visible relief. Richard folded his hands. Mrs. Whitmore, many families wait too long to organize these matters. I'm not opposed to organizations. Excellent. I'm opposed to surrender. His smile faded ever so slightly. No one is asking you to surrender anything. Then why does every document end with someone else making decisions for me? Silence. David leaned forward. Mom, if something happened, what has happened? You fell. I tripped. You could fall again. I could also be struck by lightning. Emily sighed. Please don't make jokes. I'm not making one. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on practical concerns. I agree. I closed the folder. So let's be practical. I looked directly at him. Who drafted these documents? Our office. Based on whose instructions? My clients? My children? Yes. And did either of them tell you that my attorney has represented me for more than 20 years? Richard blinked. They mentioned you had legal representation. Did they tell you she advised me not to sign anything without her review? No. Interesting. Very interesting. I turned toward David. Why didn't you mention Margaret? He avoided my eyes. It didn't seem relevant. Not relevant? You've always trusted her. I still do. Emily quickly stepped in. We just thought another opinion couldn't hurt. I wasn't looking for another opinion. The room fell quiet again. Richard carefully gathered the papers. I don't want anyone to feel pressured. I appreciate that. He stood. Perhaps we can continue another day. I don't think so. He paused. I beg your pardon. I said I don't think another meeting will be necessary. For the first time all afternoon, I saw genuine uncertainty on David's face. Mom, I've listened to every argument. I know. I've answered every question. I know, and now I have one question of my own. Neither of them spoke. I looked first at my daughter, then at my son. If I had no savings, if I rented a small apartment, if there were no house, no investments, no inheritance, would either of you still be trying this hard to move me here? Emily looked as though I'd slapped her. David opened his mouth. But no words came out. Richard quietly picked up his briefcase. I think this meeting is over. He walked away without another sentence. Neither of my children followed him immediately. Instead, they sat across from me in complete silence. Finally, Emily whispered, How can you even ask us that? I answered honestly. Because lately, every conversation starts with my money and ends with my signature. She looked down at the table. David stood first. We're leaving. I think that's best. He picked up the folder, but in his hurry, a single sheet slipped onto the carpet. Neither of them noticed. They walked away without saying goodbye. I waited until the front doors closed behind them before bending down to retrieve the paper. It wasn't one of the forms we'd discussed. It was a printed email. Across the top, in bold letters, was a subject line that made my heart skip a beat. Estimated timeline for property liquidation, asterisk. I didn't read another word there in the lobby. Instead, I carefully folded the page, slipped it into my notebook, and headed straight for Thomas's office. Something told me that forgotten sheet of paper wasn't just another mistake. It was the first piece of evidence they never intended me to see. Thomas looked up from his desk the moment I stepped inside. You look like you've seen a ghost. I may have seen something even more useful. I closed the door behind me and placed the folded page on his desk. It fell out of David's folder. He unfolded it carefully, reading every line without speaking. The color slowly drained from his face. This can't be right. Read it again. He did. The email chain wasn't long, but it was revealing. Someone from Richard Lawson's office had written, Once Mrs. Whitmore's primary residence is listed, the remaining asset transition should proceed according to the family's timeline. There was no mention of asking me, no mention of my approval, only the family's timeline. Thomas tapped the page. There's no signature, no, but there is an email address and a date. He nodded. Sometimes that's all you need. Just then, there was another knock at the door. Margaret stepped inside. I came as soon as Thomas called. I handed her the printout. She read it once, then slipped it into a clear plastic sleeve without saying a word. Finally, she looked at me. They're moving too fast, meaning? They've convinced themselves the outcome is inevitable. Thomas frowned. Is that good or bad? It's dangerous. For Helen, no. Margaret's expression hardened. For them. She walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. When people believe they've already won, they stop protecting themselves. I couldn't help smiling. That's exactly what Robert used to say. He was right. Margaret turned back toward us. I've already contacted a forensic document examiner. So soon? I don't wait once forgery enters the picture. Thomas folded his arms. What happens if the signature is officially declared fake? Then every related document becomes suspect. And if someone knowingly presented it, they could face serious legal consequences. A heavy silence settled over the room. For the first time since this began, I wasn't simply reacting. I was preparing. That evening, I sat on the garden bench watching the sunset paint the fountain gold. Charlotte joined me with 2 cups of tea. You've been busy lately. Have I? She smiled knowingly. I may be 81, Helen, but I'm not blind. I laughed softly. What gave me away? You've started watching people instead of flowers. I looked across the courtyard. Emily had just arrived. She wasn't alone. A woman I'd never seen before stepped out of the passenger seat carrying a large accordion file. Neither of them came inside. Instead, they remained in the parking lot, talking beside the car. The stranger opened the file. Emily pointed to several pages. Then she shook her head. The woman flipped farther into the folder. Emily nodded. Finally, they both looked toward the building, toward my window. Charlotte followed my gaze. Friends of yours? I don't think so. They look nervous. They should. The two women eventually entered through the front doors. 5 minutes later, the receptionist called my room. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes? Your daughter is here. I'll be right down. As I entered the visitor's lounge, Emily stood beside the unfamiliar woman. She smiled a little too brightly. Mom, I'd like you to meet Susan. Susan extended her hand. I'm a senior relocation specialist. I shook it politely. What exactly do you relocate? She answered without hesitation. Homes. I raised an eyebrow. My home? Emily quickly jumped in. We're only gathering information. I looked from one face to the other. Then I smiled the same calm smile I'd worn in countless business negotiations. That's wonderful, Emily blinked. It is? Oh, yes. I've been meaning to gather some information myself. Her smile faltered. What kind of information? I met her eyes and held them there. The kind that tells me who's really making the decisions. For the briefest moment, no one spoke. Then Susan quietly closed her folder. She looked at Emily. I don't think this meeting is going the way you expected. Neither did I, but as they turned to leave, Susan accidentally left a business card on the table. I picked it up after they were gone. Written in blue ink across the back was a handwritten appointment reminder. Friday, 10 a.m., Whitmore House. I stared at those 4 words for a long moment. I had never scheduled an appointment for Friday, which meant someone else had, and whoever planned to be inside my house at 10 o'clock Friday morning believed I would never know they were there. They were wrong. Friday morning, at exactly 9:45, Margaret, Thomas, and I parked across the street from my house. With us was a licensed private investigator Margaret had hired after the forged signature surfaced. Everything that happened that morning would be documented. At 9:58, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Emily stepped out first. David followed. A third vehicle arrived moments later carrying Richard Lawson and the relocation specialist, Susan. No one knocked. David unlocked the front door with the spare key I'd given him years ago for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. It was a plan. We watched them carry empty file boxes inside. The investigator quietly photographed everything. At 10:17, another car arrived, a real estate photographer. At 10:26, a contractor began measuring rooms. At 10:41, a realtor walked through my living room discussing listing strategy. Not one of them believed I knew. Margaret turned to me. That's enough. We crossed the street together. When I opened my own front door, every conversation stopped. Emily dropped the folder in her hands. Mom? David looked as though he'd seen a ghost. What are you doing here? I looked around my home. Furniture had been tagged. Family photographs were stacked in boxes. Kitchen cabinets stood open. Someone had even placed colored stickers on pieces of furniture marked Keep, Sell, and Denodute. My husband's favorite rocking chair wore a bright orange sticker. I walked over, peeled it off, and placed it in my pocket. Then I turned back to them. I believe the better question is... I paused. What are all of you doing in my house? No one answered. Richard cleared his throat. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. No. I looked directly at him. There appears to have been trespassing. Margaret stepped forward. And attempted fraud. The investigator quietly introduced himself and displayed his credentials. "I've documented today's events." The realtor looked horrified. "I was told Mrs. Whitmore had approved all of this." "I most certainly did not." Susan slowly lowered her head. "I asked if she'd sign the paperwork." Emily whispered. "We thought?" Margaret interrupted. "You thought wrong." She removed the forged document from her briefcase. "And we now have a forensic report confirming this signature is not Helen Whitmore's." Richard's face turned pale. You presented it." "I relied on information provided by my clients." Margaret nodded. "Then I'm sure you'll enjoy explaining that under oath." Within minutes, everyone except Emily and David had left. The house felt strangely quiet. My children stood in the living room where they'd grown up. Neither could meet my eyes. Finally, David spoke. "We were trying to help." I looked at the half-packed boxes surrounding us. "No, you were trying to hurry." Emily burst into tears. "We were drowning." I remained silent, she continued. "David's business failed. My husband lost his job. We were behind on everything." "So you decided to solve your problems with my property?" She nodded through tears. "We kept telling ourselves we'd pay you back." "When?" She had no answer. David finally whispered, "We convinced ourselves it would all work out." "No," I said quietly. "You convinced yourselves I wouldn't notice." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine shame in their faces. Not fear of losing money, shame. Weeks later, they both admitted what they had done. Their attorneys negotiated settlements, the forged documents were withdrawn, and the professionals who had relied on false information cooperated fully with the investigation. Criminal charges were ultimately avoided because of full restitution, documented cooperation, and my decision not to pursue the harshest outcome. Many people expected me to cut my children out of my life forever. Instead, I chose something harder: boundaries. Every financial account was placed behind independent oversight. Every property remained in a professionally managed trust. No family member would ever again have authority over my finances. Trust, once broken, would never again depend on good intentions alone. Several months later, Willow Creek held its annual residents' appreciation dinner. Thomas stepped onto the small stage. "I have a surprise guest tonight." The management team invited me forward. The room applauded politely, unaware of what was coming. Thomas smiled. "Most of you know Mrs. Helen Whitmore as one of our newest residents." A few people nodded. "What many of you don't know." He looked at me for permission. I smiled. "Is that 12 years ago, Mrs. Whitmore was the principal investor who made Willow Creek possible." The room fell silent. Then applause erupted. Some residents cried. Several staff members looked completely stunned. Thomas continued. "Every garden, every library, every walking path, every window overlooking this courtyard exists because one woman believed older people deserved dignity." I stepped to the microphone. "I never built this place because I expected gratitude." I looked around the room. "I built it because growing older should never mean becoming invisible." Afterward, Charlotte hugged me. "I knew there was something different about you." I laughed. "What gave it away?" "You never acted like you owned the place." I smiled. "That's because no one truly owns a place like this." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "We simply become its caretakers for a little while." That night, I walked alone through the gardens. Robert and I had once imagined on a sheet of graph paper spread across our kitchen table. The roses were in full bloom. The fountains still sang the same gentle song. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. My children hadn't lost their mother, they had lost the illusions that love entitled them to control. As for me, I hadn't moved into a nursing home. I'd come home, and this time, everyone finally knew whose home it had always been.